today we are actually updating our figures. So we can say now that there's 600,000 women and girls in Europe who are living as survivors of FGM. There's a lot happening across Europe. I think, we're raising awareness first and foremost. And we're also urging governments to really invest in prevention. What we always say, a court case is a girl that should have been saved. So we're really urging governments to invest in prevention, to engage with the affected communities, because without them, we will not end FGM. The laws, of course, are important, but ultimately it is about prevention and supporting the women, 600,000 women who are living in the EU with the consequences of FGM. They need specific support and attention, and we need to raise awareness with professionals to ensure that they're not re-traumatized or stigmatized when they seek the help that they deserve.
You mentioned the rise in the number of reported cases. What are some of the difficulties actually in identifying and then detecting to then investigate the cases that do exist?
Yeah, it's a taboo subject. It's not something that is widely spoken about. And in terms of, compared to other forms of gender-based violence, it's something that is done out of love. A mother wants her daughter to fit in with their community. So it's not something that people often come forward with. So that's why it's really important to engage with the communities and to raise awareness as well. Like, what we do see is that, even doctors, gynecologists, nurses, they're not aware of FGM, of what it is. So they may not be able to raise concern as quick as we would ideally hope.
Well, the lack of knowledge you talk about is actually quite shocking. But here in the EU, I mean, this is obviously an illegal practice in every single EU member state, but there just aren't cases that are actually being brought to justice. So what can the EU do to better facilitate that process and actually make sure that more women, more girls aren't subject to this?
Yeah, I think it's about raising awareness. It's about putting it on the political agenda, both in the EU but also globally. As you said, 200 million.
Who are you saying needs to have the awareness raised to? Who is it that's got the misinformation?
I think there's misinformation at every level. I think at political level, people are becoming more and more aware of FGM. But for many years, it was seen as a taboo, as a women's issue. Men in particular were not comfortable in speaking about the topic. So we need to raise awareness. There are misconceptions about FGM that we're trying to break. It's mainly perceived as an African issue. But indeed, as you said in your programme, it's practiced in the Middle East, in Asia. It's a global issue, so it needs to be treated as such. And we need to invest in prevention, because if you're not engaging the very communities that are practicing this, you're already losing the battle, because it's such a deeply entrenched social norm that the change has to come from community level, and there needs to be resources and investment in projects at that level.
Talking about that entrenched societal norm, we spoke to a lady earlier on Good Morning Europe who was a victim herself. She said she'd never actually spoken to her father about this. How can EU legislators have any impact on those family relationships, which is where often those difficult relationships then get worse as a result of this awful abusive practice that gets put in place for people's children?
Yeah, again, it's, there's the men and boys' involvement is so key to ending this practice, as your previous speaker spoke about. And I think in legislation, it is about ensuring that, as I keep saying, it's that the prevention efforts are to the fore, that there is a conversation facilitated in communities that bring together, the women, the girls, but also the men in those communities to discuss the practice, because it is a patriarchal practice. Historically, it's a form of controlling women, women. And that is what we need to view it as. And that's what needs to be, from a legislative perspective, it always has to be seen as a form of controlling violence, as a form of gender-based violence. So it needs to be viewed in that context and to be seen in a broader, within the Istanbul Convention, for example. It's very strong on FGM. So there is initiatives that need to be taken forward and that need to be upscaled.